Hi, everyone. Look how many people there are. I mean, don't look. Everything's going to be meeting today, the peoples of the Kulin Nations, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'd like to acknowledge the sorrow of the stolen generations and the ongoing impact of colonisation on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. And I'd also like to recognise the resilience, strength and pride of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So thanks for coming, everyone, and welcome to the second in a series of conversations Archer Magazine is running. Thank you so much. This is Archer Magazine. These conversations are obviously being presented by the Wheeler Centre, and we feel very lucky to be having these discussions here in such a big, beautiful, prestigious building. It's pretty special. So thank you so much to the Wheeler Centre for having us and letting us program these. I feel particularly chuffed because this is something I started. Don't know why, don't ask. It was a bit nuts. It's still going, so that's good. It's obviously been fine. This is the 9th issue, the family issue. We've just released our 12th issue, which is called the Play issue. And if you've never seen or heard of Archer Magazine before, it's your lucky day, because everyone here will leave with a copy of the magazine. Oh, stop! And for those of you who do already own a copy, good on you. Are there many? Yeah, got a few. Okay, good, yeah. I came along tonight with 2. So there's this one and the new one. So if you've already got one of them, aim for the other one. They'll be up the back at the end of the talk when you're ready to grab one. So I'll introduce myself first. My name is Amy Middleton, and I'm, as I said, the publisher of Archer, which is a print and online publication about sexuality and gender diversity. So we try and collect all the voices that are left out of the mainstream media about issues of diversity and identity. The most important voices, maybe. I think we all agree. And these 3 panellists to my left have each contributed to Archer Magazine at some point or other. So we've gathered them here today to talk about non-monogamy. What a fun topic. So one of the reasons I wanted to program tonight's topic was because on the Archer Magazine website, it is probably the most clicked on topic of all of them. I'm not sure why that is, but maybe we can touch on it in tonight's conversation. So I'll introduce our panellists for tonight. To my immediate left is Dani Weber. Dani Boy, are you going by Dani Weber in this conversation? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Dani Weber, or Dani Boy, is a gender fluid dragtivist. Dani began performing and speaking out on LGBTQIA+ rights while living in San Francisco, and since returning to Melbourne has performed at a variety of queer club nights and community events. Performing as a drag king, they explore topics of toxic masculinity, gender fluidity and consent education through passionate lip syncs and collabs with other queer artists. Please make Dani welcome. You've got to have some applause to make you feel comfortable on stage. I feel like it's an important part of the process. Liz Duck-Chong is a writer, sexual health advocate, filmmaker and transgender bon vivant who writes about reproductive health, rape politics, girl dick, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson and far more besides. She can be found on Twitter at Liz Duck-Chong, in your ears at Let's Do It Podcast, and has not for the life of her been able to kick her teenage crush on Keanu Reeves. Please make her very welcome. And thirdly, Anne Hunter is a passionate relationships coach and one of Australia's most experienced polyamory educators. She has been poly for over 2 decades and with her partner Pete co-founded PolyVic, Melbourne's thriving polyamorous community, in 2004. That's ages.
I know.
Please make her welcome.
Poly grandma.
So it's such a rich topic tonight. I've put together some very broad questions and I'm hoping that out of that we'll just have a nice organic conversation. And if there's anything that you 3 want to ask each other, that's totally fine. I'm really happy for it to be a collaborative effort. So I'd like to begin by asking each of the three of you, where did your journey with non-monogamy begin? And please feel free to add in any important milestones, I guess, or important points that you want to get out of the way up front. Dani, do you want to begin?
Okay, I'll start. So it began when I was at university. I was lucky enough to attend a week called Rad Sex and Consent Week. I don't know if anyone's been to one. It changed my life, so awesome. And at quite a young age, I guess relatively, learnt about non-monogamy. And learning about it, I thought, wow, this sounds amazing. I didn't know it was an option for myself. I learnt about a lot of things that week that I didn't realise were options for myself. And I kind of sat in it for a while, had, some experiences with relationships that, didn't really sit super well with me, and probably the other person as well, for sure. And then when I met my partner, Ben, who I'm currently with, it's been 5.5 years, I did mention polyamory quite early on and we weren't sure. And then honestly, I want to kind of be upfront about this today. We slowly but surely opened up and it's interesting. Someone I'm close to was reflecting the other day that a lot of couples who do go through such change sometimes find it really difficult, right? And I'm really proud of our ability to be constantly improving, constantly learning. It is so much work and it's still ongoing. But also I love taking what I've learned and experienced and sharing it with other people too. So now I do run some workshops and also support my peers and friends whenever possible. And I'm really just passionate about people being able to write their own rule books when it comes to relationships. So I think important milestones for me would include, living in San Francisco. If anyone's been there or heard much about it, you'd know it's quite a hub for non-monogamy as well, especially with the, free love movement in the 70s and in the 60s. And I think that living there as well helped me to be surrounded by lots of people for whom it was quite, usual, or they were used to it. And the biggest thing as well is having friends you can chat to and talk to and learn about it with. So that's a bit about my journey. Still on it and really, really excited about it. It's one of my favourite topics to talk about, really, because I spend so much of my personal life, working on it mostly too. So here I am.
Yeah, it's a full-time job, hey? Thank you, Dani. And Liz?
I mean, I feel that's totally right. I feel like I don't have many big milestones. I have a lot of little tiny milestones that have slowly built up, or mile gravel, I guess, that are slowly accumulating into a mile hill. And that's really where I'm at the moment. Maybe half a decade ago, a bit longer, I was in a long-term relationship. I was engaged to a woman, and we, after some talk and kind of a push of mine, we tried to open up our relationship and it was unsuccessful. And I kind of came out of that being I'm going to be the big, which I think is totally normal, as who I want the people around me to be and what I want that to look like. But it's, I don't know, it doesn't ever feel like there's ever a finishing point. It kind of feels like the marathon keeps going and I'm just waiting. I'm just there while people are holding out cups of water, just keeping on going. So.
You've both made it sound so easy.
It's great. I love marathon running.
25, 26 years down the track, and it's still a marathon sometimes. It does get easier, but it is absolutely constant work in progress, and there's always stuff to learn and stuff to grow. I started by falling in love with somebody who was married with children, and Christians at the time. And I actually married somebody on the rebound, which lasted a very short time because marriage was not for me. I can look back over my life. I was never cut out to. When our marriages broke up and we got together, we knew one other couple that was ethically, openly non-monogamous, and that was it. And then when we looked it up online, that was a milestone. Oh my goodness, getting the word and looking it up online. And I guess another major milestone was deciding to start a community, and that happened because for polyamory, and people said, where do you meet people? And there wasn't anywhere. So we started a community where people could meet. And having a community, oh my goodness, what a difference. And it's one of the big things I suggest to people is don't try and do it on your own, do it with other people. And we celebrated 30 years since we felt
too, which is that friends community. It can be so important, and the learning from other people and other people's journeys. I'm just so excited and proud for everyone here today as well, because just by being here, you're able to learn more too, like from us up here, even meet people who are interested in it too. And I also want to caveat that I don't need people to walk away from this being like, yes, I'm polyamorous now. Like, it's just so good, like Anne and I both said, to know the options out there so you can make a meaningful choice for yourself. It's just great.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of people come through the poly community and then go back to monogamy, deciding that poly's not for them, but to go back to monogamy with deeper communication and a more clear idea of what they want and how to communicate it.
And commitment to monogamy, which is something
right.
that I think so many people struggle with because it's seen as the only option.
Yeah, the default.
The default.
Like, it's extraordinary how much having romantic non-monogamy in my life has improved my like friendships and improved the relationships I have, like even with like family members, and knowing how to like have difficult conversations and how to explore subjects that I just ignored or shied away from or didn't even realize existed before it. Like, I think it opens up so many doors, even to think about and not do it yourself, to kind of contemplate what it means to value different levels of intimacy and make decisions on your own terms and not kind of exist entirely on what's being given to you externally. Opens up all these like doors of potential. It's really cool.
So it sounds like communication is such a big part of it. I wonder if any of you can give me an idea of how you learned to communicate in a way that assists with this relationship dynamic.
Yeah, you want to start?
No, you
And feel
go-
free to
go
give
for it if you
specific
want.
examples because they're always fun.
There's so much I could say on this topic, but one thing I'll say is, you know, I was at university and I was friends with some sex educators who specialise in communication, and, you know, that it suits some people and it suits some people, especially if someone's quite educated and also, you know, speaks English really well, and so they all speak the same language as their partners they're communicating with. It's so interesting because I reflected that heightened level of communication is so necessary, can be so necessary, but it only suits some people as well, if that makes sense. Or people who maybe aren't going to communicate at this complex level, or have barriers to being self-aware or emotionally, you know, aware of themselves due to even trauma or mental health stuff. It can be so difficult to kind of sit up here and say, yes, you know, get your spreadsheets out, get your whiteboard. Like, that's what I do. That suits me. So that's my caveat before I talk about any of this. Like, I'm a Capricorn. I'm like love scheduling and organising. Yeah. See, it's a tricky one because I would encourage everyone to find their own way as well. It's so important, but to find that common ground. So yeah, I just wanted to say that first.
Like, I feel
I'm sure you'd agree.
the way that I think it's often described is like, you've got to like have the Google Calendar set out and you've got to have all of these things. Whereas like for me, like organization and that kind of navigation is my hobby. Like, it's my hobby that I do with my partners. It's our pastime, like how some people play board games and some people have conversation. We like microanalyze our microanalysis, but like...
Yeah, my partner and I have meetings about the calendar.
Exactly.
Like, about the meetings we're going to have.
But like, that's a choice that we make, and it's not like how to do it. It's a really specific thing, which I think is worth taking away. That you can kind of do non-monogamy and check in occasionally. Like, that's very possible. And
But not your way.
Maybe healthy.
Yeah, so Pete, if you don't mind me saying, we like talking big picture stuff, we like talking deeply and using lots of words, and we're both into philosophy and all sorts of stuff. And then I had another partner who was the other end of the spectrum, and he and I just didn't talk that much, but what our favourite thing to do when we met was to actually climb into bed and fall asleep together, skin to skin. And we had the most delicious kinesthetic communication, and we would wake up feeling deeply connected without words, and that was our form of connection. It was quite different, but they're both part of me. So I think it's great to learn the words. Like, I think some of the things that you have to learn, that I had to learn, were to own what I wanted and to learn how to verbalise that. That was an important thing to learn, and a big hill for me to learn. I was not good at that at first.
So you mean things like sleeping and conversation?
Yeah, sleeping and conversations, but also for me, coming from a conservative Christian background, it took me quite a while to own my sex positivity and to own how much sex I wanted to be able to have with how many different people I wanted to be able to have it. And to be able to say, actually, I like that, no, I don't like that. That took me a while, just because of my background. I was a bit conservative around that. So there were things like that I did have to learn how to communicate at times. But as you say, there are so many different forms of relationship, of connection, of communication, and of need. That for me, actually, the more important thing is to sort of go, well, this is me, and this is, where I'm at, and who are you, and where are you at, and where do we overlap? And it might be stamp collecting and deep fisting or something. I don't know.
The dream, just hypothetically.
Hypothetically. Or it might be, it's allowing me to be really fully me. And this is one of the things I love about non-monogamy, is that it allows me to really ask myself the question, who am I and what do I want?
I was just thinking that while you were saying that, like, I think there's occasionally a kind of, if you've talked to poly people in the past, sometimes we talk about it kind of like a holier than thou thing, like kind of like we're doing this like extremely good thing and the plebs down there, which is just so not the case.
Really?
But I think that the reason is because there's a lot of people who are monogamous who do the same level of kind of self-awareness and self-analysis, absolutely. But when you are in lots of single relationships, that other relationships, you kind of mold yourself into who you are with that person. As you do it, like, it's a really normal thing, it's a really organic and beautiful thing to become a version of yourself with someone. But as soon as there's 2 people in the picture, or 3 people or more people, you suddenly have to ask, okay, I'm actually this person with them, and this person with them, and this person with them. I guess I'm all 3 people, am I? And it becomes this like absolute like reality check in a way that you kind of don't have to come across as much in monogamy, of being like, oh, I'm this multifaceted person. That's kind of extraordinary, but I have to understand that about myself to be able to engage with it.
That's awesome. And I guess what we're talking about is, why would there have to be so much more communication in a non-monogamous relationship? Potentially, it can be seen in monogamous relationships that there's a script book, there's a rule book, there's givens, there's things we can rely on. And I think a lot of us would agree that more communication would be great in monogamous relationships too. It's not that we need to rely on these script books. So when we're like poly or non-monogamous, we need to think, okay, how am I going to communicate what I need? I love what Anne was saying about, finding common interests. I often think of us like, I love Venn diagrams, right? It's like, let's find what overlaps in our Venn diagram and let's play with that. But in order to find that, you have to talk about it and figure that out.
And take that into our like platonic and other social interactions as well. Like, go to your friend and ask them, like, how are you feeling about this? Like, we go out for coffee all the time to this place. Do we want to explore something else? Like, who are we in this relationship? And be able to start having those conversations and not feeling like they're treading on like romantic ground, or not feel like they're getting into a sexually intimate place, but you're still actually building these really healthy relationships.
Yeah, one of the things that I love is the way that asexuality is challenging our prioritising of sexual relationships, and is saying...
Maybe we should define asexuality in case anyone here doesn't know.
Yeah. So people who... somebody can probably do this better than I can, but people who are not primarily oriented towards sex, and for whom sex is not a major thing that they seek in their relationship. Sometimes they will still engage in it because... of a partner or whatever, but where that is not a major drive.
That was a pretty good definition, Anne.
Thank you. But saying, look, our emotionally intimate friendships and things like that are really important, and why do we prioritise sexual relationships, and why do we, let them take priority? I love the way that things are just being explored and questions are being asked and things are being challenged. I love that.
I remember
conversations happening.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I remember when I was editing your piece, which was back in issue 2 of Archer, so it was back in 2014, a while ago now. And Anne's piece, once that issue went off sale, went online, and it had something crazy like 100,000 views that year or something, which we were tiny at the time. It was like the majority of our online traffic for the year. And in each year since then, it's continued to be in the top 5 stories read across the whole website.
Is it really?
Yeah.
No way.
It just doesn't quit. It's incredible. And if you Google polyamory, it's one of the first things that comes up because of this. Now, I won't go into SEO, but Google likes things that get lots of hits. So Google loves this story, Anne. It just keeps showing people. It's great.
Nice.
It's great for all of us. The advertisers love it. But what really interested me when I was editing your piece way back then was your description of polyamory as not only sexual relationships, obviously, but other kinds of intimacy, at which point I realised that probably although I was in a monogamous relationship at the time, a lot of my friendships were pretty intimate, and I would often prioritise them over my partner when needed, consensually, of course. But I'd be like, look, I know we had a date, but such and such needs me. And she'd be like, of course, go. So I guess I want to talk about the different types of intimacy that can come into play here. And, I mean, what is the line there? Where does it become another relationship? Are we all non-monogamous?
And I think that's such a great question. I've talked to older people who are living alone, because their partners died and stuff like that, about this, and had them realise that their neighbour is really special to them. Their neighbour whose grass they mow and who, sews their cushion or something like that. Just that there's a special thing there that's unwritten and unsaid and unvoiced, but they just have a sense of a connection through a thing that's built up over a number of years. And I think that monogamy has tended to try to force a whole bunch of things into a box, and to make us think that things are either a relationship, which means sex and kids and blended finances and the whole bit, or a friendship, which is much less important and much less significant and much less deep. And I'm observing people as they start to let themselves feel what they feel and experience what they experience, to discover that things do bleed across. One of the examples I love using is, I use the term intimates rather than lovers or partners or stuff like that for people that I'm connected to. And some of my intimates I don't have sex with and have never had sex with, but I will take off all my clothes and jump into bed naked and cuddle them. And there's a level of intimacy, and we'll talk about absolutely anything at a real depth. And there's a real intimacy there. And I don't know what you call that. It's not what most people in monogamous circles would call just a friend or a lover. It doesn't have a box, really. And I think that as we open up and we ask more of these questions, we'll find that things bleed across lines a lot more.
Does anyone else want to add?
I do this podcast. I do this sex ed podcast. Let's do it, and we've been doing it. Alex, the person I do the podcast with, and I have been doing it for about 2 years, and it took the first year and a half of the podcast for us to realise that we were maybe a thing. Like, we started off doing the podcast being like, wait, it's two friends talking about sex, and kind of you and Happy were just like, are we maybe partners? Like, is this...
Did that happen on air?
No, it didn't.
Oh,
Though we were considering faking it. It'd be like great for the ratings.
Just a redo. Yeah.
But we're a platonic couple. We called each other best friends. But I've been non-monogamous for a while. Whenever I hear the word non-monogamous, I hear the Muppets Menomina sketch in my head. That'll stick with you forever. You're welcome. And they were kind of like figuring it out and realizing that our relationship could be that, even though we weren't having sex and aren't intending to. And not much about our relationship changed in terms of what we do. We still go out and get a drink, we see movies, we cuddle, but actually realizing the way that we wanted to refer to each other and the way that we wanted to engage in the world. And now, they are part of the networks that I have with other people that I'm like romantically and sexually involved in. And everyone's like, this is great, like they're your partner, and everyone's really on board with it. And it's kind of incredible, but not at all what I expected getting into it. And I think that when that was a thing, and it was extraordinary that you'd like be photographing these weddings and like the bride and the groom would like do their thing, and then like she would go and hang out with all of her girlfriends and he would hang out with all of his guy friends, and they would like celebrate and party and get wasted and dance. And it's kind of like, wow, like you clearly love these people a lot more than you love each other. But no one could quite admit that it was actually those were the significant relationships in their lives. And then they would like leave, and it was like, no, like celebrate that. That's incredible that you'll like have these group of people that you want to spend your life with. And I think everybody strives to have that, but they never know quite what to call it, or they feel ashamed that that's more important than a romantic interest when they can be as important, if not more.
Yep.
I love that. I'll respond a bit differently maybe to say, like, I'll be real with you. For example, when opening a relationship that already exists, for example, like my situation, it can be tricky. Like, it can be so wonderful how we can have different levels of relationship, different ways. It's like a whole web network, and the whole spectrum as well. But managing jealousy as well, especially when you're coming from a normative background like myself, you might be like, cool, that person's your friend. Oh, you had sex with them? Okay, now I'm jealous. You know, it's like, where's that line cross, and how do I categorize these people to manage my own jealousy, which is a whole nother topic. And I find it's interesting because we're trying to find ways to talk about the people we're seeing that aren't limiting. You know, my friends or coworkers might ask me, you know, so who are you dating right now? I'm like, oh, dating is such a loaded word, you know, that's like a really big thing, you know, or who's a partner? Oh, that's really big too. So I don't know, a phrase we use right now is like, who's on your plate right now? You know,
Nice. That's so nice.
I think just to be as general as possible, but we know what each other mean.
That's so
Yummy.
cute. Well, do you mind if we talk about jealousy for a bit? And I feel like maybe it's worth defining the term compersion, because people outside of non-monogamy circles don't usually know that word, compersion. Took me until maybe last year to learn it, in fact.
It did change my life learning about it.
It's so amazing. And I run a sex mag, like I should. So do you want to talk about jealousy and how you get around it and what compersion is?
Okay, cool.
Dani?
Compersion, compersion.
Noun.
Noun, yes.
I don't think it's in the dictionary yet. It should be.
Is it not?
Microsoft
Dictionary
Word doesn't
defines
exist.
it
Yeah,
as.
it's in
Right.
some of them. Yeah.
Yes.
It's in the good ones.
So it's the joy you feel when someone you love is experiencing joy with someone else. That's my definition. Would you add anything?
That's good.
Okay, cool. So yeah, it's an active feeling of joy, which could be seen as the opposite of jealousy, right? It's like I'm actually taking joy that someone I love, it could even be a friend, but partner, for example, is having a great time over here, and it has nothing to do with me, but it brings me joy because I love them.
And maybe it can exist alongside jealousy too. Like
Yeah,
there've even been
always.
best mates that I've had that they've fallen in love and I've been like, oh, I'm not going to see you much anymore. But also happy for them. Or maybe I'm like, you would only ever used to look at me like that. Is that just me?
No. No. I have to say, my partner's recently fallen in love with someone else madly, and it's been just gorgeous, and I have so loved it. But also it's like, oh man, you're having so much fun, you know, and there's a sense of envy sometimes.
Envy, not jealousy?
Yeah, envy rather than jealousy of, oh, I'd like to be having that much fun.
I know, and then you make friends with everyone. It's really cool.
But you're making
We're
it
going to
sound
define
so
another
easy.
term, the metamor.
Yeah.
Love the metamor, who is the person dating the person that you're dating. So it's kind of like one arm out. I then add a meta every time you go. So there's the metamor, the metamor. It's great. So you can kind of define whole trains of people, the snake of metamors. But
Like
it's-
great grandparents. or something.
Exactly, yeah. It's like second, third, fourth cousin
Yeah.
kind of thing, but very different. But I really love that relationship because like you're kind of, as if your best friend is talking to you about their partner and you're getting all this gossip, but also all this drama, but also hearing all these beautiful things. And then you meet them and you're just like, it's lovely to meet you. I know a lot about you.
Yeah.
But also you're great. And so you kind of have to like then suss out your own relationship with them. That's like going alongside these things. And it's kind of incredible. It's like, I've never had a relationship quite like it where you have as much insight, but also as blank a slate to explore what that's like with someone. And that can bring a lot of jealousy because you hear all these really amazing things, as well as you hear like a lot of the foibles and stuff like that and all the drama. And you see the person you love someone, and that's extraordinary. Like it's a gift to be able to do that.
And often they'll love them in a way that you don't want to or can't, or, you know, that's different and that you really appreciate. So I have some of my very best friends and my inner circle are my metamors. And we have such a deep, abiding, loving, supportive relationship. And we've all supported each other through some pretty tough stuff.
Yeah.
And it can feel really like transgressive and important and, you know, radical, even though it shouldn't be, but it can feel that way, especially if it's like two women, for example, who are metamors, and society will pit women against each other and say we should be jealous of each other and, be in competition, but to actually be like, no, I'm going to actually really care about this person and even love them in my own way, even in a platonic way, for example. And I love that there's a word for it too. It's supposed to like, oh, that person my partner's dating or that person I'm dating's dating. It's like, cool, no, this is its own relationship.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, it sounds like a really unique one.
And you were talking about jealousy, right? It's kind of it kind of brings me back to communication too, because I think, jealousy, it kind of, as Hunter was kind of pointing to, like, can be an umbrella term, like envy might be under it, right? Like, what I'm trying to say is jealousy, gets used a lot as a word. It's like, I'm jealous, and it can be so useful to figure out what I'm actually feeling underneath. And sometimes, you might, with your partner, talk about it and talk it out with each other and support each other to help find what's underneath it. But yeah, kind of navigating that can take a lot of time, work, self-work, work with your friends. And that's one of the reasons I say poly is so much work. It's like trying to unlearn or work through so much of what we're taught in society, because there's so much ingrained in us that can make poly really difficult, can make a lot of barriers.
So what might be under the jealousy? What are some examples?
Things like, a common one is fear of loss, fear that you'll leave me for the other person.
And change, yeah.
Yeah, change, fear of change. Insecurity, they're better than I am, they're prettier or richer or smarter or funnier or whatever. A fear of not getting my needs met. In fact, I don't feel jealous very often, but when I do, it's always related to an unmet need of mine. And I usually find that once I get down to identifying the need, and I can verbalise that, the overwhelming feeling shifts and changes. And so what we encourage people to do, the difference between how we approach jealousy in non-monogamy circles and how it often gets approached in monogamy is that in classic rom-coms, my jealousy is allowed to control my partner's behaviour. But in we kind of see our jealousy as being my problem. My jealousy is my issue to deal with, and it needs compassion and understanding, and it helps if my partner can be compassionate with it, but it is actually mine to manage and to deal with. And that it's a whole bunch of things that, as you were saying, Dani, you feel this big overwhelming thing. But when you break it down into its component strands, they're very much more manageable, and it's so much more empowering. This is the one of the things I keep trying to tell people, is that being controlled by jealousy is terribly disempowering. Learning how to understand it and how to approach it, and knowing that you can manage it, is so much, healthier and happier and more empowering.
So just to clarify, when you say it's about a need that is unmet, you mean within yourself? It's something you can meet, not a need that's being unmet by a partner?
So I think it's Rosenberg, isn't it, who, in nonviolent communication, who says that a need is something that you can express entirely in terms of yourself, not in terms of someone else. So a need is something that may be possibly met by somebody else, but it is actually mine, and I need to own it. And it's my responsibility to work out what I want to do with it. So again, classically, in classical relationships, my partner's supposed to meet all of my needs, and we all know that that's not really very feasible most of the time. And in non-monogamy, the idea is to see what's on offer, what's genuinely on offer, what do I still need that I'm not getting from this relationship, and what do I want to do about that, and how do I manage it? Does that answer the question?
It's really good therapy. I feel like we're all we all owe everybody here $100. Do you want to add anything before I move on?
Yeah, I feel like another part of that I love the way you kind of said that for you, that when you kind of talking about jealousy, it comes back to this one thing, it comes back to kind of an unmet need. And I feel like for me, jealousy comes back to a lack of knowledge. Like, I feel like if I don't, even if I don't know that something is unknown, like if someone's just like, I don't know how I feel about this person, I'll be like, oh, that's fine. Whereas if I just am like, I don't know how they feel about it, then that's my point of confusion, and then I start to have some feelings. But part of that is around oftentimes I'll be like, oh, I need this information. People are just like, I don't have it yet. Or I'm not really sure what it is yet. And so that does then become my thing to kind of deal with, or even to sit with the jealousy and be uncomfortable. And sometimes it's, addressed by other people's generosity and time, but sometimes it's not. And the jealousy is just kind of like a feeling that you just have.
Totally. So, something I find myself doing sometimes is, finding reasons why my partner did something wrong, and therefore they made me jealous. It's like, oh, you could have handled this better. You could have talked to me about this. You could talk to me at this specific time about it. You could have, And that is something that I'm trying to avoid doing, moving to the future, because I love what you both have been saying about it's something for yourself to own and can teach you so much about yourself too, coming at it with curiosity. Okay, maybe I can learn something about myself in this moment.
Yeah, and it's comforting to know it's unique for everybody. We don't all feel the same kinds of insecurities. I always get washed up with that. What were you going to say, Anne?
That's fine.
That's fine, that'll do. So we were going to talk a little bit about the idea that poly or non-monogamy is conflated with queerness often, and this is such an interesting one. So obviously Archer magazine wasn't actually made as a queer magazine, but the queers took it over very swiftly, because that's what we do. It's generally about sexual diversity and identity diversity, so poly fits into that. Do you three want to just discuss how you feel queer interacts with poly and some of the stuff we were talking about earlier?
Who wants to go first?
So
I
polite.
want to think about it.
Yeah, that's right. It is an interesting one because I think that in some of the younger queer circles that I've been in, especially going to parties or going to events or stuff like that, there sometimes is almost an assumption of non-monogamy or partial non-monogamy as part of those spaces. And like I've had monogamous friends that come up to me and just like, people, don't like, they just assume that I'm this thing and they don't respect me in my how I'm doing my identity and my life. And I often, the first time that happened, I was like, oh, I was assuming that as well. I'm really sorry. I was guilty of it as well. And I think it is fascinating because obviously monogamy is a very important thing to a lot of people and a really, really empowering thing for a lot of people. But I think that, I don't know, there's maybe something in questioning norms that has to do with it in terms of hanging queerness and exploring queerness and the many forms of coming out and being that, going one step further in one sense and kind of asking what relationships can be and coming up with this answer can feel like a logical next step when you've made it.
You go.
Go for it.
So, to put it simply, being queer, adopting queer politics can be seen as pushing back against heteronormativity, right? Which is, the societal expectations that are often, the dominant scripts, right? It's like growing up, being born, being assigned a gender, growing up, being attracted to someone of the opposite sex, then getting married and having kids. Being queer often involves questioning something along that line. Not all poly people are queer, to be poly and straight, but I agree. It goes hand in hand with thinking, okay, so if I'm bisexual, for example, so I realised one day that that script doesn't fit for me in terms of only being attracted to the opposite gender. So it's like, oh, cool, what else can I question about myself? So I can see that as having a high correlation. It's not the same mandatory thing, but it's high correlation.
Yeah, and I pretty much agree. I think once you start questioning anything, and it doesn't really matter where you start, something that makes you question the script, as you call it, handed down to you as the cultural expectation. Once you start questioning anything, then it is fairly logical then to question most things. And so then there's a lot more. Once you've broken the first boundary, the next one's easier. It doesn't matter which one you break first, I think. We were commenting earlier that it's interesting, and a lot of people who identify as, particularly I've noticed people who identify as either lesbian or gay, male, I think a lot of the other marginalised genders and identities don't necessarily find poly easier, but it's a really interesting question. A lot of it comes down to cultural upbringing and stuff like that.
I'll share something, this is just my culture, my family, but my mum told me recently, sorry mum, I'm just going to share it, that, if I was gay, like gay, that'd be easy to deal with, but the bisexual polyamorous thing, she really, really can't get her head around. So that's not to say, people who are, gay, monosexual don't experience awful discrimination. But it's interesting because I think, a lot of cultures, and especially my specific family, being polyamorous is just an ongoing battle, that tension and struggle.
Liz, do you have anything to add to that? You
a
don't
little
have
bit.
to.
I'm interested if this kind of fits in with what you were saying before around coming out of a faith or religious practice, because I feel like for me that was growing up in a soft religious, an Anglican background, was kind of, once I figured out that God was wrong about the fact that I couldn't be a girl, then maybe he was wrong about a few other things as well, including how we can do relationship styles. And so kind of I stopped believing in that around like when I was a teenager, and it took me a while to come to non-monogamy after that. But there was still kind of the sense of like there were all these like very, very strict dialogues given, and suddenly they all disappeared, and there was kind of a lot of possibility there.
And another stat that I'd love somebody to research this sometime is the intersection between strong faith background or upbringing and non-monogamy, because this is absolutely something we found in the early days of Polyvic. An astonishing percentage of our group had some kind of faith background, and I would love to know what the connection is there. I don't know. A few of the people that I spoke to had said things along the lines of, well, once you find that God's wrong about one thing, then, you do start questioning everything else. And that may have something to do with it. But also, for me, the call to love one another was an important one in my upbringing and my family. And I wonder if that had something to do with it. Because my experience is that the deeper I open up to love, I can't kind of open up deeply to one person and not open up elsewhere. I find that as I open up more deeply to love, it's like opening up inside myself rather than boundarying it with different people. And anyway, this is something I'm just curious about, is the relationship between a faith background.
That's so much more wholesome than what I was thinking. I was just thinking like, just like, but growing up with like the Father and the Son and the Holy Ghost, and just thinking, that sounds like a great night. I'm kind of just playing with that.
Good idea.
Oh, and
sorry, Mum and Dad.
Some of those religious paintings. Oh my goodness.
Well, I never expected this chat to go there. Sounds like a really good article. So going back...
If only you knew a publication.
If only we knew someone who'd be willing to publish that. We'll talk. So as I mentioned, I've been really interested by the general audience curiosity about this topic on the Arch Magazine website and elsewhere, and which is really well spoken to by this really well attended event. Despite the horrible weather, I was like, oh, no one will come. Like, I barely made it. It's so windy. So I don't know. Do you think... No, I do know. This is what I want to know. It's obviously a source of curiosity for a lot of people. Do you think that is a sign of an increase in uptake of the lifestyle? Do we say lifestyle? The dynamics. You're like, no. The dynamics. And secondly, is everyone cut out for it? What do you reckon?
I'll quickly say something. I only know personally what I know and see in the world, but I remember when my partner and I were living in San Francisco, and an old friend of theirs was visiting, and we were expressing a bit of concern and fear about returning to Australia and what the scene would, how accepting people would be of the fact that we were non-monogamous. And he's an older gay guy, and he was like, you know what, I was feeling the same when I was your age and I was gay, and I'm seeing more articles about it though, I'm seeing more acceptance. Then every time there's an article in the mainstream media, he sends it to us, and he's like, see, it's getting more and more exposure. And so that for me is my indicator, especially media talking about it. Like there's been Inside and I've been on the radio talking about it. There's been like so many different mainstream things, and that's really heartening. So I see that, and I see also a lot of young people around me. When I told my sister we were in an open relationship, I was surprised to hear her go, yeah, I know. I've been on Facebook. I was like, oh, I forgot. And then I'm like, you don't care? She's like, no. And I honestly see that as her, being young and living in the north. And I just didn't think she... Does that make sense? I really thought she wouldn't be okay with it, given her upbringing. But somehow she's in completely different circles to me, but she's become okay with it. So for me, that shows that there's greater talk, greater acceptance, even though I never spoke to her about it myself until recently.
I think it's a case with a lot of these areas, like not to conflate non-monogamy and queerness, but I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of how we talk about them, that I think that people are often very socially okay with something, but not legally or structurally okay with some things. And so there's obviously a lot of kind of ongoing conversations about rights around how non-monogamous people live and how relationships work, in the same way that there are those conversations happening unfortunately ongoingly around like LGBTQIA plus stuff, when socially the like kind of vibe is like everyone's like, yay gays, and it's just like, so gay rights, and everyone's like, and there's kind of slightly more silence about it. And I feel like non-monogamy is the same thing. Everyone's like, yeah, that's fine. And there's like, so do you, like, can we like inherit stuff, or can we all live in the same house and have kids? Everyone's like, well, that's a little bit different, isn't it? And that's kind of an ongoing problem that I think will keep happening and keep being a conversation that we have. But I mean, like, I don't think monogamy is for everyone. I think that there are people for whom monogamy is a deep joy. I mean, I don't know if non-monogamy is for me permanently. Like, it's a really, really core part of my life now, but I've been so many different people and will continue to be. And there may come a point in my life where it's no longer what I want, and I take the lessons I've learned from it and use that to grow. And I might go back and forth. Like, I don't know. I think there's the idea that we are one or the other kind of is simplistic and is against the point of what it's trying to do anyway, which is break apart that structure. And it's kind of being like, no, just like go with the flow, see what happens, and kind of let it come to a place of joy rather than a place of like prescriptivism.
Yeah. I definitely know people who are naturally comfortably monogamous. And you know this because, like, one of my dear friends who's been a friend for over 30 years, never really had many girlfriends before his wife, has never looked at anybody since, doesn't want to, runs a million miles if anybody looks at him, isn't really repressing stuff, just is really quite comfortable with his one relationship. And there are plenty of what's known as monopoly relationships as well, where one person is monogamous to another person, and that person is polyamorous. And they just work out what their respective needs are and how to structure it in such a way that it works for them. Monogamy is a completely wonderful choice for some people. It's just great if there are other options for those of us for whom that isn't appropriate. We were talking before about the interesting question, and this comes up quite a lot, about whether polyamory or non-monogamy is an identity or a choice. And my observation of that is that the jury's still out on that discussion, because for me it's absolutely who I am, and I was not happy trying to be monogamous. I managed it sexually, but emotionally I was really unhappy. And for other people, there are people who say, look, for the right person, I could be monogamous, you know. And there are people who, as you were saying, you know, who love poly for a while and it's the right relationship style for them for a while, and then monogamy becomes the right style later on, and then they might shift back again, you know. So,
or even being monogamous to establish some things in a relationship and become polyamorous.
And part of that is, I think it's not often spoken about as much, is that like I have a lot of poly friends who have one partner and have had one partner for a long time and are non-monogamous and open to possibilities, maybe not actively, maybe not seeking them, but I will be viewed as a monogamous person that is like, no, I like do non-monogamy, I'm just not doing it now, whatever that means. And
it's a bit like being a monogamous bisexual person who's with a partner of one particular gender, but that doesn't change your attraction to other genders. Yeah.
Dani, do you have anything to add on the identity versus choice argument?
Well, you know, we haven't spoken a lot tonight about, different risks in being polyamorous or legal rights and stuff. You know, I have a friend in the US who's part of the consensual non-monogamy task force in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and that's, you know, driving some social change. So what was my point? It was that, so maybe talking about it in terms of identity can be important for legal reasons and that kind of thing. And I guess but for me, ideologically, I'd like to add that, for example, being same-sex attracted has gone from being, a sin to a mental illness to, kind of born this way. But I think for all of these aspects of the way we live, it should be, we have a right to be this way. We have a right to choose it and a right to be protected for these choices when they're ethical and consensual, it's not something which should be used to discriminate against us.
Yeah, that's a great ideology.
Thanks.
I do want to talk really briefly about the risks that are involved and the challenges. We were talking in the green room about some particular... I don't think we should overlook that it is not something that's widely accepted, and the reason it's hard to come out as poly is because of frameworks in our society and systemic oppression. So do you want to talk about that a little bit, anyone?
Yeah, so the only legal precedent that I'm aware of in Australia around non-monogamy is a woman in Queensland called Susan Bunning, who some years ago somebody found out on Facebook that she was polyamorous, and she was fired from her job at Centrecare, which is a large Catholic organisation, because she was poly, and she took them to court. And the judge ruled that he decided that polyamory was a lifestyle choice, and therefore Centrecare could discriminate, rather than an orientation, in which case they wouldn't have been able to discriminate.
Wow.
And that is the precedent that I'm aware of. I'm not aware of any other legal precedents. But as I was also saying to you, I know people who've had protective services called on their family simply because somebody at their school found out that the parents were polyamorous. So there is anybody who works with children or anywhere near children or has children has a tendency to be very much more in the closet and circumspect about their choices around this, because it is dangerous and it does come in for an enormous amount of attack. And in fact, I was part of a task force, a group that we were doing some research on this around children and families, polyfamilies. And the parents said that the thing that was the hardest to deal with was external response. That of all the things that they had to deal with in poly tribes, and you know, being polyamorous can be quite complex. Thank God for Google Calendar and things like that. But the most difficult thing was other people's response.
Yeah, it's even really hard to be up here, right, talking about it. And for me personally, one of the reasons I'm passionate about it is because it's changed my life. It means so much to me. It means I'm so happy, and I wish that for everyone. If everyone to be able to make these choices like this. And yeah, it really breaks my heart hearing those things. It's really, really hard.
We will throw to, we've got about 5 minutes for audience Q&A, so in maybe 1 minute and a half, I'll throw to audience questions. So have a little think about what you might want to ask.
Can I ask a quick question first?
What's that?
Can I ask a quick question first?
Yeah, please do.
I want to ask the rest of the panel, what is your favourite thing about
That's what I was just going to ask Liz. I was like, while you think, I'm just going to ask, what are your favourite things about
happy
non-monogamy?
loved up stories?
I always end on a positive. That's my trick.
I'm sorry to steal your thunder.
No, please take my thunder. I have enough.
So many things I could say. Do you want to start? Or?
Me too. Okay. I don't have to think about it. Okay. Sorry, I have so many things to choose from.
I think, as I said earlier, one of the primary things I love the most is that it's really given me the freedom to find out who I am and what I like without restriction. But I love, oh my goodness, I love my poly tribe. I love my metamors. I love the relationships that have built up with the depth of talk and understanding. I'm deep, profound friends with people I wouldn't otherwise know. I love the intimacy. I've had some glorious sexual connections. I mean, there's just it's so rich. My life is so rich because of non-monogamy.
Well said. I love dating. I love going on first dates. It's really fun. I'm so glad to meet other people who love dating, and, you know, my nesting living partner, Ben, it's so great to be like, you know, sharing in that on the same wavelength, and so excited with life. It's so fun, you know, it's so great. That's one of the reasons I love it. Life's so adventurous and great with it too. And I agree, like meeting some people you would never have met before and getting to know them really well too is awesome. So yeah, being able to just get out there in the world.
Cute.
Yeah,
Liz?
I don't know. I agree. I think that there's I don't know. I love learning about people, and it's really, really easy to learn about people when you're kind of thrown into a situation with a whole bunch of them. I went away on holiday recently with a group of like over half a dozen people with like a lover and metamors and meta-metamors and meta-meta-metamors and all of the gang, and we just all hung out and like read books and went on bushwalks, and it was like idyllic, and I was kind of like, this rules. Like I remember in high school, all of my friends used to be like, let's go away and have a happy family time, and it was like that dream but made realize, and also we dealt with our emotional issues. Like it was
There's that tiny
extraordinary.
thing. Yeah.
grown-up version.
And just the amount, like sitting reading in silence with a group of people I love, being like, this feels like good. Like there's no anxiety. Wow. Okay, listen to that feeling. And yeah, realizing that there can be points where I'm just happy with people is extraordinary.
Well, thank you all. That's so heartwarming. We've got about 3 minutes left, so it won't be too many questions. So I'll encourage you just put your hand up if it's really important. No pressure.
Hi. Thank you so much. That was such a rich and interesting, insightful discussion on non-monogamy. I do have one point to raise, though, which is that all of you seem to use the word poly to refer to polyamory quite commonly. And I know that there are members of the Polynesian community who find that to be quite problematic and suggest that saying something like polyam might be more appropriate and respectful, I guess. So I wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Great. Can I ask you, do you belong to that community? That's been the problem. There's been a big discussion on the Poly Leadership Network about this particular one. Can I pick this up? Is that all right?
We'll respond to. Go for it.
Yep, great. Okay. Do you mind if I start?
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And there is a general movement in the direction of polyam. The experience has been that it's actually been a bit. There's like basically been one person who's been pushing this, and it's been hard to find because the term Polynesia is actually a white term. It's not one that's owned by a lot of people who live in that area. They've got their own local names for their culture. And there's been people from that region who said, my goodness, I would never use that name, that's offensive. So there's been quite a lot of... what all we've been able to find, and the Poly Leadership Network actually did quite a lot of research trying to find who belonged to this group and really understand that even if it's a very small group that identifies with this, then that's to be respected. And I think on the whole moving towards either using polyamory or polyam, and again the debates are raging about which one of those to use, and you can't get polyamorous people to agree on a definition of polyamory, let alone anything else. So it's probably taking a while, but it is moving in that general direction slowly.
Yeah, and yeah, I'd say I agree with what Anne said about, even if it's a small group of people, it's important to, listen and be respectful. So, yeah, I think polyam's great. When I'm being verbal, I just try and say polyamorous, non-monogamous. Also, I think people are part of the diaspora are trying to use that word to, find other people in their community and stuff. So, anyway, it's a tricky one, and I think it's important to acknowledge that, polyamory, it can be such a white-dominated culture as well, and scene as well. So, it's kind of really icky and gross to see the pushback on it too, really grating to from other people.
Do we have time for another one? Maybe one more and then we'll finish up.
It's down here.
The microphone's coming.
You said that this is always going to be a journey that you're always going to be working on. When things do get hard, what do you lean on? What are some of the touchstones that keep you moving forward in this direction?
Nice question.
I'd say I also find monogamy really hard, So it's kind of like leaning into the challenges of something that's worth striving for me. And for me, I have a core belief and value in being non-monogamous for myself, and it's worth the work. So that's what I come back to, being like, you know what, this is important to me.
And really quickly, if you two have anything to add.
Sure. In the early days, it was a drive to understand myself and to, do my work and stuff like that. Lately, I have got such a lovely poly community of people who understand. I didn't have that originally, and so a lot of it was just internal drive. But right now, I've got so many fabulous people to lean on. That's probably my thing.
I'll go back to what I said at the beginning in terms of talking about the milestones that we have. I feel like I still have those. They're not milestones. They're not their mile gravel. You know, I've still got my big pile of mile gravel, and I didn't used to have any gravel, and I like to kind of, yeah, I think that's a good thing to go away from, is like, I've still got my gravel.
This is a really nice note to finish on. Really quickly, like to thank the Wheeler Centre again for having us, and huge thanks to the panel, Dani, Liz and Anne. How amazing. Thank you for sharing.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.